Okay, to keep things moving, the thing about Trappist beer is that it's going to be rich, both in terms of its flavor, its coloring. Basically, the Germans, when they make beer, they're kind of confined by this thing called the purity law. So they have yeast, water, grain, and hops. That's all they can put in the beer. The Trappists primarily are Belgians. And Belgians don't care. Belgians will throw in sugar, they'll throw in fruit, they'll throw in whatever. If they think it tastes good, they'll put it in the beer. And so what is in here is these are the Trappist monks. They make actually 4 kinds of beer. The first kind is called a potter's beer, a father's beer, which is a very light beer. And they would use the beer primarily for 2 reasons. One, it cleared up the water because not all the water sources at that time were all that pure and used. The second thing is that they would have the beer, since it had more nutrition, also the alcohol, but the nutrition is that when they were doing fasting, they couldn't eat, but they could drink. And so they would drink the beer as a substitute for some of their food. But anyway, so this first one is a Chimay double. And the thing about Trappist beer is it's very effervescent, so you can smell it. And what do you smell in there? Beer. Thank you, Margaret. Molasses, yes. It's more of a richer, almost like a cinnamon bread a little bit. So Trappist beer actually pairs very well with food. And so here's a shot of this one. So we'll start with this, and then I'm going to let Father Kazuski take. I've been adding him. We'll let Father Kazuski give his presentation. Then again, after his presentation, we'll have our second pouring, which will be a triple. And then after my presentation, we'll finish up with the quad.
Is that my cue?
That's your cue.
Okay. Well, I had to try my beer just to make sure it's okay. And it is okay. It's actually very good. So, first of all, everyone can hear me okay? I'll try not to talk too fast or too long, which I'm capable of doing both of those. But we've already blessed the beer, we've already talked about beer, you already have beer, and you know it's a Trappist beer. So I think my job is to tell you, what is a Trappist? So that's my job. I think if you walk away at least having some idea of what a Trappist is, and how it relates into the overall history of the church, that's, I think, point 1. And I'll try to work that in the next, I don't know, 4 hours or so? Is that good? Is that good? And then I also come with books, and part of that is I want to talk a little bit about the spirituality, I suppose, of beer, but I think it's representative of the spirituality of Trappists and then their tradition, which comes out of the Benedictines. So we need to say a little bit about that. And I'm not necessarily going to maybe not do this in this order. And then making some conclusions too about culture and about our faith. I think that's the way I'm gonna attack this. So the first thing is we got to figure out what a Trappist is. And a Trappist is a form of Benedictine monk. So I'll get into a little bit more of the history, but maybe we need a little bit more about what a Benedictine monk is, and maybe we need to know a little bit what a monk is. Because you know that you are all served here by diocesan priests. And so what's the difference between a diocesan priest and a monk? And so the quick answer to that, amongst others, would be number 1 is that the diocesan priest, Father Ward over there, just last weekend, and the rest of us at some point, we took promises. But the monk, as a religious, they take vows. And there's a distinction of promises made to a human being, namely the bishop. And then the monk takes a vow, and that's made to God. So you get a sense already of the difference in vocation between a priest, diocesan priest, we call them sometimes secular priests. It just has to do with priests working in the world, and then a monk. The other thing I want to tell you about monks and monasteries, I got to do this really quickly here, obviously, is that it develops out of the end of martyrdom. So you kind of the whole history of the church in the early parts of our history, in large swaths of the Roman Empire, it was illegal to be Christian, right? And in many places, it was punishable for being Christian. And so in those early years, where we have lots of martyrs, we still have martyrs today, with lots of martyrs in those early years, there wasn't a real need for monasticism or monks. Why? Because if you can't legally be a Christian, and if you are a Christian, you're probably not going anywhere in terms of advancement in the secular society. You tend to live a very simple life. One that is focused on practicing your faith, focused on receiving the sacraments, focused on growing closer to the Lord. You don't look for hope necessarily, certainly not optimism in this life. It's not probably going to go well for you in the end if your friends are dying by martyrdom. Well, as Constantine in the 4th century comes along and effectively legalizes Christianity, that puts an end, at least in the Roman Empire, to the widespread persecution. So what happens? Well, now you've got chances to advance in society, you've got an emperor who's got your back, like suddenly all those characteristics of being detached from the world, and being detached from kind of the optimism or the things of this life, they're a little harder to say, you know what, that's not my story. And so the monks, they find a way to live in their minds, or in a certain sense, what the early Christians lived. Does that make sense to everybody? So they isolate themselves often. They either live alone in an eremitical kind of life, so they live solitary, or they live in a communal life. Okay? And so those two forms of monasticism develop, but they develop largely after the legalization of Christianity in the 4th century. And their idea, in part, was that they're not the ones that changed. What changed was society. And so in order to have this really robust Christian living, you have the monks, okay? And they're continuing that spirituality of the martyr, of detachment from the world, detachment from advancement in the world, detachment from hope in this world, as a monk, either alone or in community. So the founder of monasticism in the West is Saint Benedict. Saint Benedict of Nursia, or the Italian is Norcia, who his followers are now a group of Americans. They live in Norcia. They also make really good beer. Side note. So he lives in 480 to 547, and let me just say, his initial idea is to go off in the wilderness and pray. And there's a story of two shepherds that stumble upon Saint Benedict, and they're walking around in the wilderness, and there's this rustling, rumbling in the bushes, and then they're like, well, who's there? And then there's this young, kind of awkward Saint Benedict. They didn't know him as Saint, they just know him as Benedict. And they're like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm praying. And they're like, can we join you? And Western monasticism is born. Right? At a communal level, you get people joining Saint Benedict, and it catches fire. One of the great fascinating details of Saint Benedict and his then Benedictines now that are following him. You know, previous standard bearer of culture, handed on truths of what could be arrived at by reason is the school of Athens. You remember the school of Athens founded by, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle? Morons. Just kidding, that's a quote from a movie. They're very smart people. And they are the founders of this school, and then people go there for hundreds of years. Almost thousands of years, 800 years. And in 529, the emperor at the time, Justinian, no relation, he closes the school of Athens. That's 529 AD. So this is a long time ago. That same year, in 529 AD, Saint Benedict founds Monte Cassino, which is one of the largest and oldest Benedictine monasteries in the world. Okay, 529. It lasts until it gets bombed in the Second World War by the Allies. We did that. It's rebuilt now, not quite probably as beautiful, as amazing as it was. But you get this long tradition. So that's a long period of time from 529 until today. And what happens through the Benedictine history is that you live in one spot. The Benedictines take, in addition to their vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, they take one of stability. So they live in that spot, and they work in that spot, and they pray in that spot, ideally for their life. Right? That's the role of a Benedictine. And they develop this way of living, this monastic life, according to a motto. And this is always good. You're trying to understand a religious order, these monks, and what they do. Ask what their motto is. Like, what's a motto? No, what's a motto to you? It's another quote from another movie. The motto for the Benedictines is ora et labora. Okay, ora et labora. It's Latin for pray and work. Pray and work. You could even add a third one, ora et labora et lege, and now you've got pray and work and read. And in that summary of their life, which is this motto, ora et labora et lege, you have the Benedictine life. What do? They live all by themselves, in community, separate. They work, they pray, and they read. And in 529 become the standard bearer for culture that's going to hand on a lot of the things that we hold dear, both as a Western civilization and as the Catholic Church. Right? So what happens is they go through their history, they go through these periods, and I'm almost done. I could say more, but I'll stop here. They go through these histories where a group of them says, no, we've been around a long time, and we've gotten really comfortable, and I'm not sure this is what Benedict had in mind, so we're going to start over and live a more vibrant, faithful Benedictine life. And we're going to follow St. Benedict even closer than so far we have, at this point in time. And so you have, through its history, almost like pretty regularly the first one comes in 910, and then the second one in 1000, and the next one in 1100, around there. But you have a group in the second mode, or second wave of this, called the Cistercians. This is a term that just comes from the place they lived in France. Cito, but the Latin derivative looks like Cistercian. So the Cistercians end up founding this. St. Robert of Molem is the founder of the Cistercians, this more vibrant, robust Benedictine life. And then they go on for hundreds of years. And then one of them, now we could fast forward, now we're in the 1600s, goes, I'd really like to live a more vibrant, more robust, more faithful living of St. Benedict's most famous work is his rule that describes how monks should live. We want to be more faithful to his rule, more authentically, more vibrantly, more robustly Benedictine. And so in the 1600s, you have it again. And his man is named, Armand Barthollet de Rosset. I don't think I can repeat it. But he founds the Trappists. So your 1600s, Trappists, bloop. Trappists are now around. They're reformed Cistercians who are reformed Benedictines, and you span almost 1,200 years to get there. So in a certain sense, when you start thinking about Benedictine monasticism, you can go from the early Roman emperor and the empire and the martyrs and the continuation of that martyr spirituality, and then St. Benedict, who's going off to himself and going to pray, is joined by others and then develops this rule and this motto of work, pray, and read. And then they're going to hand on things through the centuries, and you're going to get a reform with the Cistercians, and one of the most famous Cistercians is St. Bernard of Clairvaux. Apparently he was so popular, he was on his way to the monastery, and by the time he left by himself. When he arrived there, he had 40 people join with him. Monasteries were going to be returned to their faithful foundings quickly when you're doing that kind of thing, which is awesome. St. Bernard of Clairvaux. And then by the time you get to the 1600s, you get the Trappists. So then they go through this, maybe the last two details about the Trappists. as every religious order, especially those that Napoleon did not think contributed to the overall civic good, the Trappists were disbanded, and then in the 1700s, 1800s, reconstituted, and it was in the 1800s that they finally decided that of their work, that the way that they would sort of live out the Benedictine rule, the way that they would sustain for themselves, like every Benedictine monastery ideally would be self-sufficient, the work that the Trappists would do, many of them, is brew. So in the 1800s, that's where these recipes get solidified. So there you got the Trappists, you've got culture, you've got this standard bearer. I would say more, but maybe I'll just pause here.
Any questions for Father Gazuski before we go on?
Father, where are the Trappists located at that time?
The Trappists, for sure, I think are mostly located in France, Belgium, the Netherlands, where we find them too with these beers. The original founder was, I think, a Frenchman. I'm not sure though. And the fathers can correct me if that's wrong. I think all of them have a vocational challenge, and yeah, you think that it certainly is a valuable contributor to culture overall and the handing on of so many things, including beer recipes. We have two Trappists in this country. Diane was just sharing about her brother who was a Trappist for a time.
Are all monks priests?
No. The question was, are all monks priests? And the answer is no, not all monks are priests. Depending on orders and which order they belong, sometimes they're more predominantly priests and sometimes not. The Benedictines, for example, the order that we're talking about here, generally would ordain priests only for the use of their community. So like, for them to be a monastery, you'd want priests there to say the Mass, to hear confessions. So then the order would sort of support or sponsor and advocate men for the priesthood that be ordained within the community. That's kind of its origins. And then sometimes what happens is that brother of the monks or the monastery or the order, sometimes that vocation falls off. And what you have then in many Benedictine communities now, what you have in other orders as well, is almost everybody gets ordained a priest. But historically, it wasn't that way.
All right, to keep moving forward, what we're going to do now is our wonderful serving staff is going to come to your table for the next beer. So if you hold up your hands, they know who to go to, who have come, then if folks want to come through and I see some people really kind of parched out there, and I was feeling a little sorry for them. So while you're waiting to be filled here, I will move forward with a couple of other quick thoughts. So the first beer we had again was a double, and the second beer we're going to have here is called a triple. Now, you might think, well, there's double of something or triple or something. Really, it's not. It's more about how they brew the beer. The first one, if you remember, it was kind of like this dark amber color. This one will be very light. And so almost like a champagne, it would be a beer that you look at, oh, this is just like a normal beer. But be careful. So these Trappist beers tip a little high on the alcohol level. So like the Chimay here is 7%. The West Small that you're going to be having will be somewhere around 9. And then the quad that we're going to be having here at the end is about 11 or 12. So, but what you are going to find though too, Mr. Zander over here is looking really parched.
Fill it in.
Has everyone pretty much been served so far? Sure. Okay, well, we have some gentlemen here in the back.
Do they use hops?
They do. Yeah. No.
The question was, do they use hops in their beers? And they do, and we will not get a hoppy one.
So this one though, smell this one, tell me what you sense. Any thoughts? Marcus also says beer. I don't want to throw it in. You smell like some banana. Two things. There's the coriander. It'll be a different kind of smell to it. The thing about, especially like a West Mall, you'll drink it and it should absolutely disappear off your tongue. Sometimes you'll have a beer that kind of lingers, and this thing, it just absolutely dissolves. And part of that is the higher alcohol content. But these don't have. It's not like you drink this and you feel you're going to get hit too hard with the alcohol until it's a little too late. So you have to, again, hence the small glasses and the tasting. So we're going to talk a little bit about the beer side, and then we can come back later for general questions, both for me and for Father Kaczewski. So, what makes a Trappist beer a Trappist beer? Well, there's actually an authentic application for that. And all the three beers we have tonight are all authentic Trappist. There are now 11 in the world. Some of you are going to have sheets on your table that kind of lay them out. We'll talk about those in a second. You'll say, but Jerry, there are 12. Well, since that listing came out, the number one on the list, the Ockel, has been kind of decommissioned for a reason I'll tell you why in a second. So to be a Trappist beer, it has to meet the three following requirements. First, the beer has to be brewed within the walls of the monastery. So if it's off-site or whatever, no, it's got to be within the monastery itself. Second, it has to be brewed by a monk or under the supervision of monks. Okay? The number three is all profits after expenses for the beer and for the monastery have to be given to charity. So you're not just drinking beer, you're supporting the monastic community. So thank you very much for supporting the monastic community tonight. So there are 11 beers in the world, and why Ockel has been taken off the list, and most of you have that breakdowns. I think I ran short of a couple of handouts, is that they no longer had a monk. And so, especially in Belgium, so of these now 11 beers, there are 6 monasteries in Belgium, 2 in the Netherlands, 1 in Italy, 1 in Austria, and 1 in the UK. There used to be one in the United States. Spencer in Massachusetts was formed in about 2016. Well, the monastery is still there. They started producing beer, and what they found apparently is that they felt it was becoming too distracting, and for them to be able to, it was great beer. Got a little bit left at home, but it was really good stuff. But they, this is the monastic approach towards things, and the Trappist approach to things is that the selling of the beer and the people coming in, they wanted a tasting house and all this, and they said that's just too much distraction. It's getting away from our life. So they stopped producing beer. So we're down to the 11. We're down to the 11. And they're wonderful places. Had an opportunity to visit many of them, but it's not like it's not like going to the Liney's Lodge. I mean, some of them, they don't even let you around the monastery. Some will have like a restaurant across the street that you can go to and get the beer. But it's not like you walk through and have a tour and they have merchandise. With one big exception, La Trappe, which is the quad, which also is a great beer, but they've kind of gone a little bit more into the commercial end of things. But the rest are very, very, very private. All they'll do is basically the beer truck comes out and it goes to a distributor. So that's kind of a little bit what it's going to go through. Belgian beer itself, unlike normal beer, and I know we've all done this before, you'll buy a case of beer, it'll sit in the basement or out in the garage or whatever, it might be around for 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 months, maybe longer. The one in the back of the fridge. After a while, they kind of go a little bad or get a little skunky. Trappist beer, for the most part, ages very, very well. Some can be well over 5 years. If you keep it cool in a dark place, they do a thing called bottle fermentation. So when they end up brewing the beer, the last part of the brewing, they'll throw a little bit of yeast in and cap it, and then it continues to ferment over time. And there's some beer that, like some of these Chimay I've seen are 25, 30 years old, and they get really mild. It hardly tastes like a beer at all. It's more almost like a liqueur. But it's only Trappist beers that can do that, so it's pretty cool. Only the one beer though that you cannot do this with out of Trappist is the Westfall Triple, which we're having right now, because it's actually a lager, but still a great beer. Why do I like Trappist beer? Okay, I'm a banker and I'm cheap. All right. Why is that a thing? All right, because you can have, all right, let's look at wine. All right, a good bottle of wine, decent bottle of wine. If you wanted to go to Woodman's or something, you could buy, $10, $12, $15. You buy a bottle of Josh or whatever you want to have. You want to get something really special, $20, $22. I don't know whatever you want to pay for wine.
Justin also makes wine.
Justin. Yes, Justin. Yes, Justin does make wine. Yes, there's a label called Justin Wine. But it's even at Woodman's, they'll sell there's 65, 70, 80 beer bottles of wine that go over hundreds of thousands of dollars. The most expensive beer in the entire world, which is arguably the best beer in the entire world, I can get shipped here from Belgium for $35 a bottle. And they say, my gosh, $35 for a bottle of beer? I'm a poor man. So I can get the best beer in the world for $35. And that's because it's shipped here. That beer is available in Belgium, which is called West Letteren. If you look on your listing, you'll see the West Letteren 12, which is a phenomenal beer. And there it's like €7 or €8, even though they can't make enough of it. But again, more of the monastic background, the Trappist background is it's not about making money, it's about producing a good product at a fair price that everybody can afford. And there's actually a secondary market for this beer, for some of these beers, certainly the West Letteren 12, and which the monks really frown upon. And so when people like me buy it and have it shipped here, that's actually not really great. But Father Kazuski is offering confessions afterwards, and I'll go with you. Now, beer though, here's just a little trip through beer, and I don't understand this, because how many of you drink coffee? Okay, and I bet your first coffee you ever had was an espresso, really dark. No way, you take it, oh, this is awful, all right? So what do? You have this latte, there's sugar in it, there's milk in it, okay. You start on this really kind of this soupy thing, and over time, you probably lose the sugar, and maybe you lose the milk, and then you're down to dark, and then all of a sudden, so you progress down it to the point where all of a sudden you have these, espressos, double espressos, these triple shot things, correct? That how it kind of works, okay. Wine's the same way. You said first wine you ever had, if you had wine, you have a Moscato or something very sweet, very, and then after you've had a few, then you go to something a little darker, then you work on, if you get down, if you have like a Cabernet, that's a really, bold red wine. If that's your first wine, no way you can do that. Beer's the same way. Unfortunately, people today mostly get stuck in the light phase. We have every kind of Coors Light, Bud Light, Pabst Light. I mean,
You can't even name them.
it's all light. I mean, and every you go to even around here, a lot of the things it's 7 or 8 packs of light beer, and then you go, why do I do that? Dark stuff. It's awful. Well, yeah, because you never let yourself go down that path a little bit. All right. So yeah, you probably don't want to necessarily start at a Trappist beer for your first beer. But if you work your way through it, what you're going to find is that these beers have so much more flavor, a lot more complexity. A Michelob Golden Draft tastes like fermented water. I mean, there's nothing there, people. I mean, think about it. You're not drinking that because it tastes great. You're thinking about it because it's cold, it's something I can put down my throat, it's good. You don't go, oh my, The bouquet of this is phenomenal. Said nobody. Right. But what these beers offer are something just, they're much more complex. You learn to appreciate. And even though, so all these Trappist beers are all different, you know, and then each brewery will sometimes brew like 2 or 3 kinds. And they'll, again, the double, the triple, the quadruple. Not everyone does the quads. The quads are like these big, heavy beers. And we're gonna have a sample of that in a little bit. But those are really, really fun. Anyway, I'm going on and on too.
What means 2?
Moving forward, there are about 5 of these beers that are available locally. So these I bought at Woodman's. So I mean, it's not like you've got to order special for them. So the ones that I can find most readily are the Chimay, the Westmalle, or Vol, which is also a phenomenal beer. Rockford, and then the Trap, which is, we'll have the Trap tonight too. So like I said, they have the double, the triple, quadruple. Also, using some old European weighting system for alcohol, there are also things called 6, 8s, and 10s, and which is the same thing as a double, triple, quadruple, but just to confuse you, they call, some of you have 6, 8, 10 on them. It's the same thing, don't get confused. But they're also, I'll call these Trappist wannabes. And so what a wannabe is to me is they kind of brew in the Trappist style. And they'll have a picture of a monk on the label, and they'll try to, pair themselves with the beer, even though they aren't really authentic Trappists. And these are called like Abbey ales or Abbey style or Belgian ale, which will be brewed in that same style of these, but stick with the original.
Some of the bottles will even say, I helped build the monastery. So by drinking the beer, you're helping to build the monastery. So these wannabes don't have that.
They don't have that. But I'm just going for a little bit of, and Belgium is the beer capital of the world. I used to think growing up that Germany was where the beer capital was, and I was wrong. Again, I said the Germans are they're very proper people, they're very structured people. My last name is Kiel or Kuder, I'm very German in that regard. The Belgians are like that. They'll, like I said, they'll throw sugar in their beer, especially like candied sugar. So you'll see, like when we have the quad, those of you who are sampling, it'll be a very sweet. It's almost like a dessert beer. It's really phenomenal. But they'll just add these different flavor profiles. There are over 800 different beers that are brewed in Belgium. Okay, and Belgium is a country of about 8 million people. So to survive there, you've got to brew a really, really good beer. Only beer there can be on draft or in bottles. They do not allow cans. And they will not serve you a beer in Belgium unless they have the proper glass. Every beer in Belgium has their own glass. I brought 2 of them here. This is the Chimay glass. This is the Westmalle glass. Especially the Westmalle glass. What kind of shape does this have? Chalice, exactly right. So even if they have, apparently I've been told, even if they have the beer on tap and they run out of glasses, they'll stop serving the beer. So different rates for it. The drinking age for beer in Belgium is 16, for spirits is 18. The classic Belgian, if you want to go to a Belgian pub, they'll have French fries, charcuterie, and Belgian beef stew. Now, I like the story about French fries. I've heard different stories of how that came, but French fries are actually Belgian. But the story I heard was that in World War I, when the American soldiers were in the war, the borders of the countries were a little bit blurry, and they thought they were in France, and they had these deep fried cuts of potato, and they thought they were French fries because they thought they were in France. They brought the name here. We call them French fries even though they're from Belgium. So that's kind of what I got, overall. We're getting on. I know we got...
Jerry, what's a proper temperature to serve Trappist beer?
Actually, around 55 degrees. So this is warming up a little bit. So I'm going to finish this last one here. I'll have our folks in the back, if you want to get the quads ready, we can have those come through. So while those are coming, do you have any questions regarding Belgian beer? Yes, sir.
Well, I'm just curious about your, what's your impression of the Stella Artois? That's also a Belgian, I believe, but it's kind of like, this is like a light.
Yeah, it's very light. Yeah,
It's very light.
and I mean, and they
It's not Trappist, that's for sure, but I mean, what's
it's
your
not Trappist, but they brew. It's a great beer for this market because that's what this market wants to drink. You know, so why is it taken off? Because it's great beer. Well, it's a great beer that is probably better brewed than a lot of our beers, but it's what our market demands. You know, you put a Chimay on tap downtown on the Tomahawk, probably wouldn't serve it. I do. Before I forget, I do want to make a shameless plug. You'll see these cards on your table. So I do a podcast for the bank called Banker with a Beer, and it's about every week. And I interview people in the community, and we drink beer and we talk about anything from the school system. We had Molly from Max here. I've actually had Father on the podcast before, so I try to lean a little bit into the Catholic side of it without trying to be overly blatant about it. But if you like podcasts, you want to find a local one, that's my shameless plug. Margaret, you had a question.
2 questions. Number 1, you said they age well because at the end they throw more yeast in and it continues to ferment.
Correct.
Doesn't that give off a gas? Aren't you at risk to have it explode in your basement over those 5 years? Have you ever had a beer explode?
No, I haven't had one explode. What they will do though, there are some Belgian beers that will, they won't explode, but when you open them up, they'll kind of like volcano a little bit. So if you have some of those older ones, I try to I'll take them over a sink before I open them up, because when they come up, you're left with one of 2 options. Either you let it spill, or you're taking a quick drink that you weren't really expecting, and it's probably all foam. So.
Second question, does your wife enjoy the Belgian beers as much as you do?
Okay, so my Mary and I have been married now for 35 years. And when we first married, she didn't drink at all. And which I respected and honored, and she said, I do to me anyway, which is, great. I was getting her to heaven, and she knew that. But I have this theory is that everybody likes beer, you just haven't tried the right one. And there are some things like a Belgian beer, like a lambic, which is this raspberry wonderful beverage that you have no idea it's actually a beer, but it tastes, it's very fruity, it's very flavorful. And so after starting to like some alcohol and trying a beer, 5 years ago I fell in love with her all over again. And I came across a beer, it actually was a quad that we had here. She goes, hey, I like this. And what I didn't realize, she never liked the taste of hops. And most of the beer will have this very bitter, especially today when people do IPAs and double IPAs and hop heaven and things like that. If you like the taste of hops, there's just no way you think that's what a beer tastes like. You're good. But if you don't like the taste of hops, but you really want to try beer, try one of these. You guys want to come around and put your hands up and we'll get going on the quad? All right, before we go here, any other questions before we go on the quad? For me, or? We're good? Any questions for Father? Oh, yes, sir.
I had one, say you're sitting between, say, a bush light person and a Nick Olin person. That's what they like, right? They're very old, and they've tried many different things. And you wanted to steer them towards this, what would be like an intermediate step along the path?
Oh, great question. So I would say
The question was really like, how do we make converts? Sorry. Oh, sorry. I screwed it up. How do we make converts to Belgian Catholic beer?
That's a good way of phrasing it.
Yeah, no. So a great first step is a saison. So a saison is you ever had, so Lucette, you remember Lucette Brewery over in Menominee? They have a beer called Farmer's Daughter. It's a saison. I call it American saison. It's a lighter beer, but it has just a little more body, just a little more flavor. And so if you try a saison, to me that's the entry level of kind of taking that step down the path, because it's just say, geez, this just has flavor. It's got stuff going on here that my other beer never had, but it's not offensive. So that would be my recommendation. And there's one in either that or a great Belgian one. It's called a DuPont Saison, and they have a women's phenomenal beer. Sure.
Do you think a lot of the issue here is everybody's so calorie conscious? Like, how many calories are in this beer? I want it to make 64, whatever.
Yes. No, it's part of it. I also think, when you drink, okay, our beer culture, well, I don't want to be, my parents grew up working in the paper mills in central Wisconsin. Beer at that time was equated to volume. And I asked Jake Leinekugel this question. He was on my podcast a while ago. And I was asking Jake, well, what's the hardest or easiest beer to make? And he said, well, an ale is really easy. And so he said, what's hard? Well, a lager is a really hard beer to make because it takes 6 weeks. They've got to cool it, and fermenting the beer in cold tanks is called lagering. So when you ever took the Liney's tour and you went to that room and they had these big vats and it was cold, that was the lagering area. But what that did though, and I said, well, that's expensive. He goes, yes, it was. Well, why did all these become lagers? Because if you look historically, a Blatz, a Miller, a Pabst, a Schlitz, a Hamm's, they're all lagers. Why were they all lagers? Because you can drink a lot of them without getting filled up, is the bottom line. So when you go, and remember my family playing cards, they bring out a first round, they bring out a second round, they bring out a third round. Probably my family bring out a fourth round. Okay, so you could drink a lot of beer without feeling really filled up. A lot of the ales and things have a lot more carbonation, so they basically bloat you and you can't have that much. So it came down to volume. You made more money if you sold more beer.
So y'all talked about the monastic brewing. Is there any mendicant brewing, or is that not really a thing?
I don't know.
Yes, there are. When you go to Germany, the Franciscans have a label of beer, and so they at least brew. So it's called Franciscaner.
Thank you.
That's all I know about them. There might be others. So his question was about the mendicants, and another group of order in the history happens with St. Francis of Assisi and St. Dominic, founder of the Dominicans, and then St. Francis of the Franciscans. So these are different than your monks, whereas the Benedictines, they take this power, chastity, obedience, and stability. The Mendicants didn't take that last vow of stability, and instead would walk around and beg for their livelihood. So the word mendicant means beggar, and these Franciscans, Dominicans, were noted for their fact that they went around begging for their livelihood.
Now we're going to go on to my favorite style of beer. So this is a quad for those of you who have it, and like as you smell this, I mean, like I said, this is just like cinnamon bread in liquid form, and it's wonderful. This is the beer my wife fell in love with. So if you don't like hops, this is where you want to go. But again, this has, hence the small glasses, this has a lot of alcohol content. But what you'll find though is a quad is a relatively new style of beer. They've only been brewing it for maybe like the last 70 or 80 years. But it's mostly considered, you'll call it like a Christmas beer. It's a beer that you have for holidays. It's rare, I would say rarely brewed, but it's used for special days. Most people wouldn't drink quads normally, but if you ever want to treat yourself, it's a great way to enjoy a malted beverage.
La Trappe is the origin of that name, Trappists. So we're having a La Trappe beer.
So any other questions? If not, if there's some extra bottles that are open, you guys want to, those of you who bought glass, you want to wander back there, want to drain some of the bottles that we got? Yes, there's a La Trappe left. You know, this, we cannot cover this back up, and it would be a shame to dump this down the drain. And Father Kazuski and I do not want to be on a first name basis of some of Chippewa Falls finest. So enjoy, thanks for coming tonight.